Can anyone see if I'm recording? Because I can't see. I think I am. Cool. So we're starting, and hopefully more people will join us. Welcome. This is our fourth webinar in the series, this like a core knowledge course. And hopefully these four webinars together will give you like a good starting point as madrichim. This one is about the conflict, as you can see. It's going to be hopefully very basic, but give you a lot of information. The reason that it has to be very basic, there's two reasons. One is because it's a really, really, really big topic. I mean, it's one of the biggest things that Israel is dealing with in the last 50, if not 70, if not more than that, years, and we only have 1 hour. So it's going to be very basic because of that. And also because the point is mostly for you to have a basic understanding and for all of us to be on the same page. It might mean that you've heard these things before. It's okay. It's actually good if you've heard this before. It means that you have some knowledge, and it means that I'm not making stuff up. So it's okay if you already know what I'm talking about. Please feel free to ask questions. You can use the chat. It's open. That will be the easiest thing for me because I can just see what you're writing, and that will be a good way for us to communicate, but you can also unmute yourselves. I might, because we don't have a lot of time, I might be a bit rude and just ignore your question because we really don't have a lot of time, but I'll try to answer all of your questions. So like still ask questions, but I might not answer them. And also I might sometimes ask you to write things in the chat just to make this a bit more interactive. Let's see if it works. For example, if you can all write in the chat just like hi to see that it works, that we can all see it. So write something nice, like hello, hi, something like that. Oh, amazing, it works. Thank you, Jesse. Very nice of you. So that's how we will do it. I'm trying to, so in this session, what will we actually do? We will start by looking at like some context that we'll understand like what is this whole thing about, what is this conflict, who is it between, when did it start, all of this type of things. So we'll have some context to it. Then we'll look at some key issues and some key terms. We'll also look at maps so we can understand more or less what is happening. And then we'll talk about some solutions. So it's not about solutions that we as FZY offer or like what I as the GAN think, or it's not about you like finding out what is the solution that you believe in. It's not about that. It's about understanding the offered solutions that exist right now. Sorry, I keep thinking that I need to press enter. These are the key terms that we will be looking at. So hopefully by the end of this session, we will be able to touch on all of these things and you'll be able to understand it better. So every time when we'll talk about something, you will see this term appear on the screen, and it will also do a little dance like this. So that's how you know that we spoke about this specific term. And finally, before we like officially start with the context, I want to start by saying that I'm the GAN and I'm Israeli and I'm Jewish, and I probably also have my own political opinion. And you know all of this. So why am I starting by saying this? Why do you think it's important for me to say that I'm Israeli, that I'm Jewish at the beginning of this type of session? Any thoughts? You can write in the chat or you can unmute yourselves. I'll give you a second. Why is it important for me to say that I'm Israeli, Jewish, that I have some opinions maybe?
Where's the chat?
If you unmuted yourself, you can speak like this, but the chat, you'll find it, I think it's under like participants. It's meant to be there. But Alex, why do you think it's important for me to say at the beginning of this session that I'm Jewish and I'm Israeli?
Your opinion is valid.
Yes, it is. Thank you. But yes, it's my opinion is valid, and my opinion is obviously affected by.
I think also because
yes,
sorry,
Jenny?
because
no. Yeah.
Your opinion can be like quite biased towards because like you live in Israel.
Yes, it's Talia, right? I didn't see you speaking. Thank you, Talia. So yeah, maybe it's a bit biased, maybe if I don't want to be. My intention is to be 100% objective here, but obviously I can't ignore the fact that I grew up just like you. I grew up with a certain narrative, with a certain story that I know, with a certain point of view. And I think it's very important to start by acknowledging this. So just like these people, I don't know how well you can see the photo here, but just like these people here, there's like 6 people, and they all, sorry, for different reasons, don't know why, they're touching an elephant, but they're all blind or like covering their eyes, and they all touch the elephant and they feel different things. So they think that that they know the story, but the story is different. So one person is touching the tail and they think it's a rope, and one person is touching the leg and they think it's a tree. One person is touching the body of the elephant and they think it's a wall. And for them, that's their point of view, that's their perspective. So that's the story that they know. So similarly, I guess, we need to understand that our eyes only see some parts of the story. And it's okay. It's really okay that we grew up with a certain narrative. And I think for us as madrichim, that's why it's important for me to start with this. We need to be able to acknowledge it, not to apologize for it, okay, but to be aware and to say it out loud and to start, especially with sensitive topics like this. So this is basically me, it's not me saying I'm Dagan, I'm Israeli, so I probably don't know anything about the conflict. This is me, Dagan, saying I'm Israeli, I'm Jewish, so everything that I'm telling you, it's probably, there's more to that, and it's probably not the whole story. And it's okay. So that's why it was important for me to start with this. Now we can really look into the whole context. So when it comes to the context, I want to ask these 4 questions that we'll start looking into. The first is conflict between who? Who is this conflict between? Is it between countries, between governments, between people, between nations? What is this? And I'm actually asking you. So again, if you want to use the chat or if you want to unmute yourselves, can you maybe try to answer? It's not like a quiz, but just to open it to a discussion. Who is this conflict between? Thoughts?
Israelis and Palestinians.
Okay, so Israelis and Palestinians. So it's what is it? People. It's between people. Okay. Is it just between Israelis and Palestinians, or is it also, maybe it's the same, but is it also between Israel and Palestine? What do you think? And if it's okay if you guys don't answer, I just assume that you think about it. Alex wrote, between people who occupy the same geographic area. Okay, so most of it, so we feel like it's between people. So as you can see in these photos, the right one is like, it does show us that it's between people. In the left one, we see, we'll talk about who these people are very soon, but it's also between, I mean, it's hard to say governments maybe, yeah, but also between politicians, between governments, between Israel and Palestine. So let's try to understand, what does it mean, Palestine? Because we will talk about who are the Palestinians very soon, but what does it mean that it's between Israel and Palestine? What is Palestine? So there are 3 explanations to what is Palestine. The first one is that Palestine is the area where Israel is now. Before Israel, it used to be called Palestine. That's like the territory of Israel, the old Palestine. Like for example, my grandparents, they were born in Israel before it was Israel. So technically they are Palestinians. They don't call themselves that because they're Israelis, but technically that's what they are. So that's the first explanation of Palestine, the old Palestine. Then there's like the ideological explanation of Palestine, which is the idea of a Palestinian state, the idea that a Palestinian state should exist, whether it's in the West Bank or in the old Palestine in Israel, but that's the Palestinian state. And the third explanation to what is Palestine, and that's the most typical, like typically internationally, that's the one that people, wait, sorry, I just realized you might hear me better now. The third one is the Palestinian Authority, which is the area where Palestinians live in the West Bank. And this is the most common way of looking at Palestine. And politically, this is what is known today as Palestine. So what do I mean politically and internationally? This is what is known as Palestine. Palestine, it's important for you to understand, Palestine since 2012 is recognized as a state in the UN. It has a special status in the UN of a non-member state, which means that they can participate in all of the assemblies, whatever, but they can only observe, they can't really contribute. There are two other states that have the same status, also the Vatican City, for example. So it's interesting to know it does count as a state to some extent. What does it mean that it counts as a state? Who represents it? So this is the time to look at these three terms: Fatah, PLO, and the Palestinian Authority. We already mentioned the Palestinian Authority. This is the area in the West Bank. We'll look at it very soon when we'll see the map. So I'm sorry if it's a bit like we're starting with this first and not with the maps. But we have the Palestinian Authority. Who controls the Palestinian Authority and represents Palestinians? That's the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. This organization, it started in '64 as an organization that was completely against Israel. The whole point was to destroy Israel, to establish an entirely Palestinian state. But since '93, the Oslo Accords, which we'll talk about later, it now recognizes Israel's right to exist, and it represents the Palestinian Authority. So that's more or less like their government. Who controls the PLO? Who runs the government? That's Fatah. Fatah is the main political party. And for the last few decades, actually, they are the head of the PLO, which controls the Palestinian Authority. So hopefully these three terms are a bit more understood now. And after we understood them, they can do the dance. Any questions about Fatah, PLO, Palestinian Authority? Obviously, it's very, as I said at the beginning, very basic understanding, but it's important to understand. If there aren't any questions, I'll just finish this part of this section, this questions, the conflict between who, by saying that it's a conflict between people, but it's also a conflict between, it's a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, but also a conflict between Israel and Palestine. Oh, and lastly, just to mention, that this person that you see in the left photo next to Benjamin Netanyahu, do you know, does someone know who this person is? Oh, wait, Alex said that he has a question. Yes, Alex. You can type or unmute yourself. Or no. Fine, then does the Palestinian Authority have an official mandate? I'm not sure I understand what your question means. Maybe someone can explain it to me. But basically, they are officially recognized by the UN, if that's what you mean. But they have a special status. Okay. I don't know if I answered your question or not. Their declared purpose. So basically, the Palestinian Authority is there, like politically, formally, they're there until there's a specific deal with Israel. So they're only there to take care of business in the West Bank, in the Palestinian Authority, until there's an official decision of like a solution to the conflict. Does this answer your question? Okay, gotcha. Cool. The guy in the photo, does anyone know who this person is? The one to the left? So I'll tell you because you're all on mute. This is Mahmoud Abbas, also known as Abu Mazen, and he is basically the head of PLO. So he's the guy to do business with, basically. That hopefully answers this question, conflict between who. The next question that we want to talk about is conflict about what? What are we fighting over? What are we fighting about? What is this whole thing about? Is it a religious conflict? Is it a political conflict? Any thoughts? Anyone? You can write in the chat. Trying to keep you active here. Is it about a land? Is it about a religion? Is it about something else?
Might be all together. I think, like, it's about land that has something to do with the religion and politics.
Okay, so Gali is saying it's also about land and about politics, and also Johnny says a bit of both. Thank you, Johnny. So yeah, it is a bit of both, but let's try to understand it a bit more. It's called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? It's not called the Jewish-Muslim conflict, which makes us understand it's something a bit more local, a bit more specific to the land. But this land is not just any other land. It's a land that has specific history and holy sites. And that's why religion is also a really, really big part of it, which makes it obviously more complicated. But I want to ask you, because some people might look at it as a religious war, which is dangerous, I want to say. Why is it dangerous to look at it as a religious war and not as a political war or political conflict? Again,
I'd say, oh,
yeah.
can I?
Yeah.
I'd say, like, if you're looking at it more as a religious, it brings in more like Jews around the world as into part of the conflict, and it means that like Jewish people around the world are like associated with that.
So it becomes bigger, right? It becomes something a lot bigger and more people are involved. I agree completely. And I also want to add that, or does anyone else? Sorry, I lost you. Can you say it again?
Yeah, it's by making it Jewish, I think quite often Jews around the world who may have like no knowledge about the conflict or may not agree necessarily with the Israelis dealing of the conflict often get dragged in and associated with having these beliefs.
Yeah. So it becomes a lot bigger than just us or just this, right? And I also want to say a political war or a political conflict is a lot more manageable than a religious war, because once it becomes a religious war, it's really, really, really hard to extinguish, to deal with. It's bigger than all of us, and it gives justifications to a lot of things, and it brings more and more people into this. So I think there is a danger of looking at it as a religious war. But obviously, there are some religious elements that are making this more complicated. So just to understand what we just said, it's a conflict about the land, but it's also a conflict about religious sites in this land, who has access to them, who can pray, who can control those sites, and all of that. And on top of that, it also became this conflict about the narrative, about who was here first, about who's the strongest, who's the weakest, how do people see us, view this thing in the world, and all of that. But that's kind of like a byproduct of the main thing here, which is a conflict about a land. Next question. Who are the Palestinians? So if we said before that Palestine, basically today, it mostly means this area of the Palestinian Authority. So does this mean that Palestinians are people who live in the Palestinian Authority, or does it mean something else? Again, I'm asking you. Are Palestinians just people who live in Palestinian Authority? Cool.
People,
So,
a lot of people support them in other areas of the world. They don't just have to live in Palestine, I don't think.
Yeah, so they don't necessarily. So we'll get to it because it's also a matter of like self-definition as well. Someone wrote, it's people who have Palestinian ancestors as well. Yeah, that's very true. And also consider themselves Palestinians, right? So that's why it's a lot more than that, because it's not just like an ethnic group definition, it's also a self-definition and a political definition, the political identity. So first and foremost, it means an ethnic group of people who are descendants to people who lived in Palestine, as in lived in the area where Israel is today. And today they don't live there anymore. Why is that? 48, as we probably know, the War of Independence, or the Nakba, how Palestinians call it, the Day of Catastrophe. That's when around 700,000 Arabs from Palestine had to move, displaced, evacuated, fled, a lot of different names for it, displaced and moved somewhere else and left their homes. And they are now basically refugees, and their ancestors as well. Sorry, their descendants as well. They are all refugees right now. So it means that today there are between 5 to 7 million refugees. They all live, a lot of them still today live in refugee camps based in different locations in Jordan, in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, also in the West Bank. And those camps are managed, controlled by the UN, by UNRWA, which is an agency by the UN. So it's an ethnic group of, and a lot of them are today refugees. So it means that they don't necessarily live in the Palestinian Authority. What does it mean for them that they are refugees? They still see themselves as Palestinians. They believe in what is called the right of return. Okay, not to be confused with the law of return, which is the Jewish law that allows Jewish people to make aliyah. It's not that. The right of return is what Palestinians see as their right to go back to their homeland, to their homes that they left behind in Palestine. And that's what this key represents. You can see this key here in this photo. The key is a symbol to the right of return. It's a symbol to the Palestinian identity or nation even. And you can see this key, a lot of Palestinians might wear it like we wear Magen David or Chai or something like that. You can also see it in like in stories, in TV shows, even in kids' TV shows or movies or things like that. You can really see a key in a lot of places, because a key represents the house that was left behind and the opportunity, this idea of one day returning. So this is what the key represents. So it's not just, as we said, it's not just an ethnic group, it's also an identity. It's a political identity, because especially after 1967, when Israel occupied the area of the West Bank of the Palestinian Authority, more and more Palestinians or Israeli Arabs now call themselves Palestinians. Some Israeli Arabs who never even, their families never left Palestine or Israel, they call themselves Palestinians because they feel connected to this idea. And lastly, it's also like a nationality. They're very, very connected to the idea of the land, and it's a matter of self-determination. And a big part of it is the land. And it's important to understand it, because when we talk about solutions later, we need to remember that some solutions, like any solution that doesn't have a Palestinian state in it, might not be so welcomed by Palestinians. So that's more or less what it means. And I want to say something maybe a bit controversial, we'll see. Some people might compare the Palestinian identity with Zionism. Why would I say that? Why do you think, how can we compare in any way this identity, this Palestinian identity, to Zionism? Thoughts? Is it similar in any way? Can you see any resemblance?
I think it's similar because it's a group of people who have like a commitment to a land, a geographical place, through what they think is like an ethnic connection.
Yeah, so thank you, Natalie. So like we just said, this connection to the land is a very big part of the identity, very similar to Zionism, which is also very much about this connection to the land, self-determination. Also, some people might say that Zionism was created in a way because of anti-Semitism. It was kind of like an answer to anti-Semitism. And maybe some people will say that even today Zionism still exists because there's still anti-Semitism, and it's still an answer to anti-Semitism. In the same way, some people might say that Palestinian identity is the answer to Zionism, and it exists because of Zionism, and it still exists because of Zionism. It's interesting to think about it. But then again, some people might say, wait, but Zionism is not just that. Zionism is not just an answer to something else. It's like a feeling and a commitment and the connection to the land and all of that. And then some people might say it's the same with Palestinian identity. So what I want to say here is that both Zionism and Palestinian identity, it can mean a few different things. It has a few different ways of looking at it. And that's why people can also look at it in different ways, if it makes sense what I just said. So the terms that we spoke about now were the Nakba, the catastrophe, and the right of return. Any questions? Amazing. So now I want to move on to the last question in this part of context. When did this conflict start? Did it start when Israel was established, or before that, or maybe way, way, way before that? Obviously, if we look at it as a religious war or religious conflict, then we're talking about like way back. But as we said, we're looking at it as a conflict about the land. So officially, we can say that it started in 48, because before that, Israel wasn't really a country, so it couldn't have been an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? So officially, it's 48. But it does have very strong roots even before that, during the British Mandate. So most of you probably know, between 1917 and 1948, this area, this territory of Israel, of Palestine, was controlled by the British government. It was the British Mandate. And already back then, there was an Arab population and a growing Jewish population, because there were the first aliyot, right? And every aliyah that came, the Arabs got a bit like scared or annoyed, or I don't know, and then they riot. And then as a response to that, the British government is trying to deal with all of this. They issue a white paper to limit the access, the enter of Jewish population into this territory of the British Mandate. And every time this is more or less the dynamic, very, very already like the conflict is starting. But again, in 48, that's when it becomes like official. And another very important date here, or like year, is 67, because the first thing in 48 is the trauma of the Nakba. And the second thing is 67, is the occupation, right? Because, okay, so first they had to leave their homes, and then in 67, Israel is now controlling them. We'll get to 67 very soon. So I want to say something very important. If you haven't listened until now, hopefully you'll listen now. Those two issues, the trauma of 48 and the occupation of 67, big, big, big issues for Palestinians. I want to say that even if Israel somehow takes care of the second problem of the 67 occupation, even if somehow we deal with this, it's almost impossible to eliminate the first problem, because this trauma of the Nakba is something that is inherited in the identity, I guess, in the Palestinian identity. And this is something that is very, very hard to deal with. I want to move on now and talk about some key terms and key issues. We'll do it by looking at the map and start understanding what has changed and what is the West Bank and what are we talking about here. So as I said, the British Mandate controlled this area until 48. In 47, they've had enough. It's too much to deal with, this whole Arab-Jewish problem, and they give the power to the UN to make the decision about this land. What should we do with it? The UN form a committee. They send a committee to Palestine to have a look, to understand what to do with it. They decide that this land, that Israel should have independence, and they formed this plan, the partition plan, that passes in the UN. And that's the offer that you see right here, the left map. This is the partition plan. Basically what they say, you can see that this like light brown, I think, color is the proposed Arab state, and the blue is the proposed Jewish state. It's the proposed Arab state is about 43% of the land. Today, I don't think any Israeli, I guess, would be okay with this. But back then, Ben Gurion, who was the head of the Jewish agency, which was kind of like the government, but it wasn't like Israeli yet, so it wasn't really a government. And he accepted it because obviously it's the best we can get. If you look at it now, it looks like a jigsaw puzzle. It doesn't make any sense. But back then it was like amazing. We have a country. It's not to be taken lightly at all. But the Arab leadership does not accept it, and that's when we go to the War of 48, War of the Independence, the Nakba. And at the end of this war, it's the second map that you see to the right. So you can see that those purple areas, they are the areas that were meant to be the Arab state, but they're now a part of Israel. So basically, at this point, it's 49 straight after the war. The West Bank is a part of Jordan, Gaza is a part of Egypt, and all of the rest, the purple and blue, that's a part of Israel. So that's where we're at 49. Happens every time. Okay. This map to the left is the same map that we just saw of 49, okay? It's 49 until 67. And I want to say before we look at the 6 Days War map, when we say, because sometimes maybe you hear when we talk about peace process, we talk about going back to the borders of 67 or going back to the Green Line borders. These are the borders that we talk about when we say go back to the 67 borders. I know it's confusing because after 67, the borders have changed, but we're talking about before 67, basically. These lines, basically it means that Israel is outside of the West Bank, it's not controlling the West Bank, and that Gaza and the West Bank are not a part of Israel. These are the 67 lines. Sometimes we call it the Green Line. Here you see it as a red line, actually. It's called the Green Line because in the agreements that were made after the 48 war, it was like drawn in a green, whatever, marker or something like that. That's why it's called the Green Line. But that's what we are talking about. So it's important to understand it. And then we have the map to the right, which is after the 67 war. So at the end of the 6 Days War, we ended up with this map. And basically everything that you see in the dark brown, these are all of the territories that Israel occupied after the war. So it's a lot, as you can see. It's like the Sinai Peninsula, and it's Gaza, and it's the West Bank, and it's also the Golan Heights. All of this is now a part of Israel. This war, the 67 war, didn't just change the actual geographic map, it also changed the political map. It was a major turning point for Israel, because now, not only that we have all of this new territory, we also have all of these new people, these new like people to understand what to do with, and it means a lot more problems. It means political problems and moral problems and religious problems and a lot of things to now deal with. And from now on, Israel's politics is all about the West Bank, whether we should be there or not, how we should solve this issue. The entire future of Israel is now all about that. So that's for us, like for the conflict, a major turning point. Now we want to look more specifically at the West Bank. Sorry. So that's the West Bank, and as I said, Israel occupies the West Bank since 67. You can see here the green line that we spoke about. Here it's really in green. And then you see all of these different colors, right? Yellow and orange and blue. And they represent the different areas. So we have area A, which is in full control of Palestine, like Palestinian Authority. We have area B, which is Palestinian civil, but Israel controls military control by Israel. And then we have area C, which is the blue, and this is full Israeli control. This was not there from the beginning. This is not how it looked like in 67. Between 67 and 93, this whole ABC thing didn't exist. It was mainly chaos, and also the first Intifada. And after the first Intifada, basically the government was like, okay, we need to understand what to do with it. And in 93, we had the Oslo Accords. It's like, sorry. It's basically like a series of negotiations between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, who was the head of PLO. And they decided a few things. One is a mutual recognition between PLO and Israel and the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, and also this division to ABC. Okay, so it's important to understand this ABC thing only from 93, not from 67. What else can we see in this map? We have also these dots. We have blue dots for Israeli communities, and we have orange dots for Palestinian communities. What does this mean? So Palestinian communities, we understand it's like cities or whatever, like Ramallah, we know Hebron, Nablus, that's how you say it in English, all of that. But what does it mean, Israeli communities? Why all of a sudden we have Israeli communities here? So Israeli communities, it actually, the way that we usually talk about it, we call it settlements, right? So we have settlements in the West Bank since 67, like first thing after we occupy this area, we already have settlements in the West Bank. We have around 200 settlements today in the West Bank, which is, it's a lot, and some of them are really, really big. Ariel, which you can see close to Shiloh, like relatively in the middle. It's a huge city, it has university, so like these settlements it's a lot of settlements. Why would Israelis want to live in settlements in the West Bank? What is the idea here? Can someone think maybe what's the idea of living in a settlement in the West Bank? I'll wait. You can write, you can unmute yourself, you can just think about it. Why would someone want to live in a settlement in the West Bank? Or I can tell you. So basically, one of the reasons to live in a settlement in the West Bank is it's like ideological and religious reason, because some religious people, and religious Zionism is all about that. If you've been to Josh's session about different types of Zionism, religious Zionism is about Eretz Israel Hashlema, the entire biblical land of Israel. It's the promised land that that God promised to Abraham, and that's where we need to be. That's where Jewish people need to be. And if we'll be there, if Jewish people will be in the West Bank, politically it will help us maintain it and not lose it. So that's, it's also like a political statement. But also for some people, it's just like cheap accommodation. It's an easy way of living, not too far from the center of Israel. It's kind of like, I don't know which area in London or in Manchester or whatever. I don't want to insult anyone, but it's like a cheaper option to live somewhere near the center. So that's another reason, but mostly it's ideological. Religious, ideological, and political. We want to be living in the Eretz Israel Shlema and the entire biblical land of Israel. So that's why people want to live there. What is the problem with that? What is problematic about people living in the West Bank? I feel like you don't want to answer, so it's fine. So I'll just tell you. We don't have a lot of time anyway. The problem is that this area is meant to be maybe one day a Palestinian state, or maybe it's like, it's not. Some people might say that it's problematic because it's not ours. So obviously there's like a moral issue here. Another problem is that if one day we do want to try and get to some solution and we want to withdraw from the West Bank, it will be really, really difficult because, as I said before, those settlements, there's like a lot of them. It's hundreds of thousands of people, and it's not that easy to just move them now to Israel. So it's becoming more and more difficult to imagine a situation that all of these settlements will just one day disappear. Another problem is that around the world, it doesn't look very good for us, and internationally, most people are against these settlements. Sorry. So this is a bit about settlements. I just want to see, wait, if we touched on all of the points. Yeah, so we talked about the Green Line, about the Oslo Accords, about Area A, B, and C, and about settlements. Any questions? Good, you're making it easy for me, thank you. So now, I wanna, if we go back, you can see that there's this area here that we didn't really discuss, which is Jerusalem. And as you can see, it's a bit, Jerusalem is a whole other story, and it will take us a few good hours to really, really understand everything. But let's try to at least understand most of it, the important stuff. So I'm starting with these maps again, because I want to explain what happened with Jerusalem throughout the years. So at the beginning, with this partition plan, the suggestion was that Jerusalem will be an international area that the UN will take care of. So it's not in Arab control, it's not in Israel control, it's just international. Eventually, after 48 war, Jerusalem was split. So West Jerusalem was in control of Israel, and East Jerusalem was in control of Jordan. East Jerusalem also has the old city in it, where all of the religious holy sites are. So that's important to understand. So it was really like split in half. After 6 days war, Israel had control over the entire city of Jerusalem, including the old city, including all of those sites. What does this mean? Sorry, that's the best photo I can find. I know it's like the red, maybe it's hard for you to read. But basically, this is what it means. So Temple Mount, it's this like square, this plaza, this whatever. You can see like the blue borders of it. And the western wall is actually like it's a part of the borders of Temple Mount. This is what everything is like all about. And inside this area, on top of this hill, because it's basically a hill, we have two very important religious sites for Muslims. There's the Dome of the Rock, which is the one with the golden thing, and we have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the one to the right. Sometimes we think it's the same thing. It's two separate sites, both very, very important for Muslims. Al-Aqsa is like the farthest place. That's what it means in Arabic, and that's where Muhammad, the Prophet, basically that's where he kind of like parked his horse, and then he walked to the Dome of the Rock. There's a rock there. He climbed that rock and went up to the sky. That's the story, and that's why it's very, very holy and important for them. When it was under the control of Jordan, Jewish people could not go to visit Jerusalem at all. They couldn't go to Jerusalem, which is a major thing politically and religiously and nationally. Like it's a really, really big deal not to be able to go to Jerusalem. So when we actually occupied Jerusalem or freed Jerusalem, or there's a lot of different ways to say it, but when we got Jerusalem back, it was a major thing to be able to go to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, to be in Jerusalem again. You probably know this photo of the soldiers. It's called like Soldiers Cry in the Kotel, because it was really, really a big moment for the Israeli army to be able to be in the Kotel. So what happened after that? After the 6-day war, basically, Moshe Dayan was the Minister of Defense. He met with the Palestinians, and they agreed on some terms of how this whole thing would work. Basically, Jews are only allowed to pray in the Western Wall. They're not allowed to pray inside Temple Mount. They are allowed to go there, but not to pray. So that's a very like thin line between going there and praying there. And inside the Temple Mount, the Waqf, which is like the Muslim trust, they are in charge of managing the place religiously and just like logistically. But around it, around the borders, Israelis are in charge of the whole security matters. So as you can see, it's very, very confusing. There's like, it's very sensitive, this whole issue. And throughout a lot of different times in history, the access to these sites was limited or completely closed for both Israelis or Palestinians for different reasons. For example, the Second Intifada. So this whole thing, again, it's very gentle and very dangerous and very easy to like explode. And this is one of the biggest questions, whether like if we ever find a solution, what does it mean about Jerusalem? Who will control Jerusalem? Who will be able to pray and where? All of these questions are always there, and it's something that we need to remember when we talk about solutions. So we spoke about the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, and Al-Aqsa. So far, just to finish with this part, we discussed a few key issues. We spoke about the borders, we spoke about the control of Jerusalem, who controls it. We spoke about settlements, which is a major issue, or might be an issue when we get to talking about solutions. We spoke about Palestinian freedom of movement. Actually, we didn't really discuss it a lot, but if you remember that we saw all of these different areas where Palestinians live, one of the issues in the West Bank is that their freedom of movement is limited, because if they want to go to Tel Aviv, for example, they need to go through a checkpoint. So I'm sorry I didn't mention it, but now we also covered this. And we spoke about the right of return. A lot of issues that we need to think about now when we look into solutions. So, by the way, if anyone has a question, let me know, because it's really weird. I'm just speaking and I don't know if you want to add something or ask something, so feel free to do it. Solutions. So throughout the years, people have tried to maybe come up with new solutions, but it's mainly those two solutions that we probably have heard a lot about before: one-state solution, two-state solutions. There might be more, and there are lately like a few more solutions, but first we'll focus on those two. We'll try to understand why they are the offered solutions, what is good about them, what might be problematic about them, and then we'll try to see if there's anything else on the table. So the first solution is the one-state solution. That means, and it can mean, there are a few different approaches to what does this mean. Because on the far radical left, it can mean an entire like secular democratic state in which all of the citizens, they all have equal rights, and that's one way of looking at it. It can also mean, which is mostly what the right-wing parties in Israel today, that's how they view it, still a Jewish state with still a Jewish majority, but with a very big Palestinian or Arab minority. But the fact that it's a Jewish state might mean that Jews will have like maybe a bit more rights. So what exactly does it mean? What the rights that Palestinians will have, what does that mean? No one knows for sure, but this is more or less what it means. It means that in order to achieve this, it means that Israel will annex the West Bank and give citizenship to all of the Palestinians in the West Bank. Is this something the Palestinians want? Do you think? Will they be happy with one-state solution, Palestinians? Maybe someone else can say something.
I doubt it.
Doubt it. Why?
Not sure they'd. Well, it depends on the state. If it was a Palestinian state, then sure, they'd love it. But if it was a Jewish state, Israel, then I think they'd be a bit more against it.
So what people are talking about now, it's either a binational state or it's like a Jewish state with a big Palestinian minority. So you think they won't be happy with it?
No.
Okay, and I guess I agree, because we spoke earlier about how a very, very big part of their identity is the fact that it's self-determination, and they want to have a Palestinian state. So we can assume that they won't be happy with this solution because it won't offer them a Palestinian state. What can be other problems of, I'll just tell you, what other problems of this solution, that it's one state, is that it might hurt the Jewish majority. Maybe it won't be a majority anymore, because if we remember that there's the right of return, and if potentially there are 5 to 7 million refugees wanting to come back to this land of Palestine, and it doesn't mean that they will come back, it means that they have the right to return. And if they will return, what does it mean about the right of return? And even without all of the refugees, it does have a demographic threat to it. So that's one of the problems of this approach. On the other hand, I mean, it can be a really good solution, because if they do have rights, and if everyone, I mean, if we have like a proper agreements, I guess, that can be a really good solution. Also, most people that support this solution, they actually think that it's the best out of a worse situation. We have to be practical. We have to come up with some solution. And that's what you see here in the quote. That's Avram Burg, who used to be a Labour Party PM. He used to be he used to support two-state solution. And he is basically saying, listen, it doesn't work, the two-state solution. We have to be pragmatic. We have to move forward with some solution. This is the best thing we have right now. So this is also something to remember. That's what we've got, and we need to work with something. Then we have the two-state solution. This two-state solution is saying, okay, you know what, if we had a demographic issue with the one-state solution, now we won't have a problem, because we have one Israeli, we have Israel, one Jewish state with a Jewish majority, and we have Palestine, a Palestinian state with a Muslim Palestinian majority. Fine, right? Everyone is happy, all good. What is the problem with this solution? What can you see? What do you think can be problematic about this type of solution? It's fine, we can be quiet for a while. Or you can just think. So one thing that can be problematic is the security threat. Wait, someone wrote something, Jenny. People won't necessarily be happy with the amount of land they get. When you say people, do you mean Israel? Do you mean Palestinians? What do you mean? Wait, maybe she's typing. So Jenny is saying that people won't be necessarily happy with the amount. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. With the amount of. Yes, someone was saying something.
Yeah, I was just saying, because obviously, if you do a two-state solution, there's still always going to be the conflict of people wanting more land. Like, obviously, there are like those borders that are like suggested, but in reality, both parties would both sides would probably want more land. So they're still not probably going to be as happy with that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. If we already know that Arab leadership said no to the partition plan, why would they say yes now? So that's one thing we can say. Maybe it's not enough. For Israelis, it's also a security threat here. So maybe we don't have the demographic threat, but we have a security threat now, because as you can see in this photo, we haven't mentioned Gaza at all, because this is not our focus, and it's a bit more complicated now with Hamas and all of this. But if we talk about a Palestinian state, what does it mean about Gaza? Is Gaza part of it or no? If it is in some way, it means that we're surrounded in a sense, and we don't have the army control in the West Bank anymore. So it might be very dangerous. And also, if you look at the Palestinian point of view, what about the right of return? That's not where they wanted to return to, right? Their homes, their key to their home, it's somewhere probably in Israel, in a bigger, older Palestine. So what does it mean about the right of return? Mostly when we talk about two-state solution, it's most likely that we talk about Israel giving up land and Palestinians giving up on the right of return. This is not something that Palestinians can really give up on because it's a part of their identity. And if they're giving up on the right of return, they're betraying millions of refugees that are waiting to, like, ideologically, they're waiting to return one day. So this is a major problem because it's almost like asking for something that is impossible. So where does this leave us? Like, both of these solutions are very, very problematic. I want to talk about this very quickly because I know we're running out of time. And this is, Alex raised his hand. What does that mean? I don't even know. Alex, if you want to write something, you can write. Or you can...
Yeah. Can I ask something?
Yes.
Just quickly. Sorry. Who controls Jerusalem officially?
So officially, you mean Jerusalem, the whole city?
Yeah, the whole thing.
So Israel controls Jerusalem.
Okay.
Okay, Jerusalem is Israel's capital city when it comes to Israel. A lot of countries around the world, they won't recognize it as the capital city, but for Israel, Jerusalem is the capital city, and Israel occupied Jerusalem or freed. I'm sorry, maybe I'm using wrong terms in English, but it's a part of Israel since '67, after the 6 Days War. Specifically in Jerusalem, the old city, as in like the Temple Mount. In the Temple Mount, the people who manage it and control it logistically is the Waqf, which is a Muslim trust. Okay, but like the whole city of Jerusalem is a Jewish, like it's a part of Israel. Within that, there's also East Jerusalem. So obviously, and again, I need to explain to you that it's an hour-long session. It's a lot more complicated than everything I'm just saying right now. But yeah, it's controlled by Israel. Cool?
Yep. Yeah.
Thanks. So we spoke about the one-state solution, the two-state solutions. Both of them are a bit problematic, and we're left with a big confusion. I just want to say this, it's not really like a solution, but it's something that Micha Goodman, who wrote the book Catch 67, something that he is saying, and I think it's really interesting. And generally, if you can read this book, it gives a really, really good understanding of this whole situation. And he is saying, Israel is not in a conflict, Israel is in a catch. The conflict is not, it's like not a problem, it's a catch. And what is the difference? A catch is a problem that is unsolvable, basically. That's like the definition of a catch, I guess. And this is exactly where we're at. We have two solutions that are both problematic. Each one of them is trying to solve the other problem. Okay, so one problem is the demographic problem, because if we go for the one-state solution, then we have a demographic issue because we might not be a Jewish majority anymore. But the second option, the two-state solution, it solves the demographic problem, but it causes a security problem. So both problems are solving the other problem, and we're staying in this catch, and it's very, very complicated to get out of it. And as you can see, we're still in this catch after a really long time. So he's saying we're in a catch, and the only way to get out of it is to turn it from a catch to a problem. And only when we turn it into a problem, that's when it might become solvable. How do we change it from a catch to a problem? That's the actual question. So he's not really coming up with any real solutions. He's talking about changing the way that we view it, the way that we understand it. So far, Israelis are stuck with this way of thinking that there's only black and white, left and right. There's only one state or two states. And that's it. And for years, that's how we were used to think, and it became a part of our identity. It's really, really like inherited in us. That's a part of who we are, and it's really also hard to change the way that we think about it. And he's just basically saying, let's try not to look at it as two options. Let's try to find something in between. Instead of saying, for example, land for peace, maybe part of the land for partially, for like some peace or something like this, something in between for the long run to be able to manage this conflict and move it forward. Because at the moment, we're just stuck. Politically, he's also telling the central parties in Israel to try and come up with a solution. So far, the central parties in Israel, they don't focus on the conflict. They leave the conflict to left and right parties, and they want to focus on social issues and financial issues, things like that. So he's basically saying, in order for us to move forward, central parties also should have central solutions. Maybe if we have more options, more solutions, we can then try to move forward. We kind of ran out of time, so I don't want to really focus on that, but I just want you to know that there are a few other suggested solutions. None of them are taken very seriously, at least in Israel. There's this deal of the century that Trump one day might reveal. It was meant to be in June. It's because of the new election in Israel, it's now been delayed again, but one day he'll reveal his plan for the Middle East, and maybe everything will change. But again, I don't want to focus on that. Just to finish, I want to give you some resources, and because I want to say, again, this is very basic and there's a lot more to it, and I'm sure that you can look for a lot more materials. You can ask us, we can give you more stuff. These are some of the materials that I've used, and there's a lot more. I know it's very hard with these type of like topics, because you're not sure if it's real, if it's relevant, if it's okay, if it's not biased. I think it's okay as long as you look at many different resources, and then you can try to get a fuller picture, but you can really speak to us if you need more help. Finally, if any of you are around in Manchester on the 24th of June, we have a talk with Sana Knane. She works for the UJA. She's an Israeli Arab, and she actually defines herself as Palestinian. And it's a very interesting talk. We had it in London already. We're going to have it in Manchester. That's a perfect opportunity for you to also hear another side and to ask her to tell her story. It's fascinating. So if you're there, let us know and we will remind you. And really, really, I just want to finish by saying this is very important, this whole conversation about the conflict. It's very important that you as Madrichim will understand it and will care about it, not just as Madrichim, also as people who care about Israel. But Israel is not just a conflict. And it's important to say, Israel has a lot more things to offer. Sometimes we tend to like really, really focus on the conflict because we want to understand it and it's so complicated. But Israel is not just that. It also has a lot of like other fantastic things, and it also has a lot of complexities that are not just a conflict. There's also like a lot of conflicts within Israeli society. So there's a lot more. And as Madrichim, we need to be able to find the balance between talking about these complex issues and understanding them, but also know when to just talk about the other stuff that Israel has to offer and understand how to do both of those things. I hope it gave you some basic understanding. If you want to ask more questions, you can stick around. I just don't want to take too much of your time, but I can stay here now and answer some questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dagan.
Thanks, Dagan.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Cheers again.
Thanks everyone for coming as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming.